The year was 1932. In Bradford, Pennsylvania, the air was thick with the smell of crude oil and the cold despair of the Great Depression. This was not a city of glamour or bright dreams. Bradford was a harsh industrial town carved into the Allegheny Mountains, where men drilled deep into the earth and watched their fortunes disappear as the economy collapsed. The oil boom that once created millionaires had faded, leaving behind rusted rigs and families barely holding on to survival. Every coin mattered. Every possession had to last a lifetime. On a tense summer evening, George Blasdell stepped onto the terrace of the Bradford Country Club. Inside, people danced and drank, pretending the world was not falling apart. Men wore worn-out suits and drank cheap whiskey while banks failed across the nation. Blasdell, already a man who had tasted failure in the oil business, stood quietly and observed. He watched a local businessman pull out a lighter to light his cigarette. The lighter was a heavy, awkward brass device made in Austria. The man had to stop talking, put down his drink, remove the cap, and use both hands just to create a flame. It looked clumsy, outdated, and embarrassing, especially in a place that still tried to appear elegant. Blasdell looked at the scene and sarcastically asked why a man of his status would use such a terrible lighter. The man simply shielded the flame with his hand and replied, "Well, it works." Those two words hit Blasdell like a revelation. In a world where everything was failing, the economy, the government, the American dream, only one thing mattered: something that worked. The Austrian lighter was ugly and inconvenient, but it had one brilliant feature. It stayed lit in the wind. A perforated metal chimney protected the flame, disrupting airflow and keeping it alive even in strong breezes. Blasdell realized the technology was brilliant, but the design was terrible. The biggest problem was that it required two hands. A man needed one hand free to work, to drive, to fight, or to hold someone he loved. Blasdell didn't invent the lighter, just as Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile. But he understood something others didn't: the psychology of the American pocket. A tool had to be more than functional. It had to feel natural, effortless, and reliable. He bought the rights to sell the Austrian lighter in America, but no one wanted it. So he retreated to a small workshop above a garage. With second-hand equipment and no factory, he began building something new. He kept the Austrian chimney, but threw away everything else. He designed a rectangular brass case that fit perfectly in the hand. Rounded corners protected pockets. But his greatest invention was simple: a hinge. By attaching the lid permanently, the lighter could be opened, lit, and closed with one hand. The lid snapped shut with a metallic click, a sound that would become legendary. That click felt like confidence. He needed a name, inspired by the modern sound of the word, zipper. He played with the word until he created Zippo, a name that sounded fast, strong, and mechanical. In late 1932, the first Zippo lighter was sold for $1.95, a huge price during the Depression. Blasdell knew he couldn't sell a toy. He had to sell trust. While other companies planned products to break, Blasdell promised the opposite. If a Zippo ever failed, no matter how old or damaged, it would be repaired for free, forever. He wasn't selling fire. He was selling certainty. The Zippo was heavy, smelled of fuel, and demanded care. You had to trim the wick, replace the flint, and refill the fuel. But that maintenance created a bond. This wasn't disposable. It was a companion. The Zippo was born from a moment of chance, a windy night, a clumsy lighter, a frustrated man. Blasdell didn't want to be a jeweler. He wanted to be an industrialist. And instead of jewelry, he built confidence in brass. He gave people a way to carry fire in their pocket. A symbol of control in a world that felt out of control. But the world would change. Convenience would replace permanence. People would stop fixing things and start throwing them away. Yet in that cold workshop in 1932, when Blasdell snapped the lid shut on the first Zippo, the sharp click sounded like the birth of an empire. The wind could blow. The economy could crash. But the flame would survive. The Zippo was not a luxury. It was a survival tool for a generation desperate for something that would never fail. And from that tiny garage workshop, the Zippo Manufacturing Company would grow into a roaring industrial giant, a cathedral of noise, metal, and fire. The factory was a cathedral of noise. It did not smell like a store or a showroom. It smelled of cutting fluid, brass shavings, and the sharp chemical bite of fuel. The floor trembled under the rhythm of massive stamping presses. Multi-ton machines slamming down with brutal force to punch lighter cases from raw sheets of brass. Fine golden dust filled the air, thrown off by polishing wheels spinning at incredible speeds. The workers were not delicate craftsmen. They were industrial soldiers, feeding the machines that produced the most durable object in the American pocket. At the center of this organized chaos stood George Blasdell. He had transformed from a struggling inventor into a master showman of industry. He understood that a product without a story was nothing, and he wanted his story to be impossible to ignore. He commissioned a custom Chrysler Saratoga with 2 giant functional Zippo lighters mounted on the roof, complete with glowing neon flames. He drove it across the country as a rolling monument to persistence and belief in tangible, real engineering. The true test of the factory came in December 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor thrust the United States into war and shattered industrial supply chains overnight. Brass suddenly became a strategic resource, reserved for ammunition and artillery. Civilian manufacturers were banned from using copper and zinc. For a company built entirely on brass, this should have ended everything. Blasdell refused to shut down. He looked at available low-grade steel, a material that rusted easily and looked unattractive, and decided to rebuild his product from it. Engineers created a thick, porous black coating baked onto the steel until it formed a hard, uneven texture. It was rough, tactical, and nearly indestructible. The finish became known as Black Crackle. All civilian sales were stopped. Every lighter produced was shipped directly to the U.S. Army and Navy. The factory became part of the war effort. The Zippo was transformed from a consumer item into military equipment. For millions of soldiers, the Black Crackle Zippo became essential gear, as important as boots and dog tags. In jungles, forests, trenches, and skies, the Zippo provided warmth, light, and survival. Soldiers used it to heat food, sterilize tools, clean weapons, and signal aircraft. Stories spread of lighters stopping bullets and saving lives. Each Zippo became a personal talisman, carrying scars and wear marks unique to its owner. The fading black paint revealed steel beneath, a visible record of survival. Back in Bradford, the factory ran nonstop. Blasdell demanded perfect quality, believing failure in battle could cost lives. The guarantee became a moral contract. Broken lighters sent back from the front were repaired, not replaced. Technicians restored dents, hinges, and cams, preserving every scratch and memory embedded in the metal. Each lighter carried fear, boredom, courage, and victory. By 1945, Zippo was everywhere, carried by generals and privates across Normandy and Iwo Jima. When soldiers returned home, they brought their lighters with them, and demand exploded. The black crackle finish disappeared when brass returned. But the identity of the Zippo had been forged in war. It was no longer just a lighter. It was a symbol of endurance, simplicity, and American industrial strength. In the decades that followed, Zippos became personal identity markers. Logos, military units, companies, and personal stories were engraved into the metal. A man's lighter told his history, his loyalties, and his journey. It was a metal biography carried in a pocket. Blasdell stood on the factory floor, watching brass sheets feed into roaring presses. The air thick with noise and power, witnessing an empire built from steel, fire, and belief in things that were made to last. He had built a fortress of reliability. He believed he had created the perfect object, immune to the ravages of time and fashion. As long as men needed fire, they would need a Zippo. He did not see the plastic storm gathering on the horizon, the cheap, colorful tide about to wash over the world and extinguish the value of permanence. He only heard the clink of the lid and the roar of the machines. The heartbeat of an empire that thought it would last forever. The enemy arrived in the 1970s, not with guns or tanks, but in shipping containers from France, molded from cheap, colorful plastic. The era of the disposable had dawned, the throwaway society rising to challenge everything Zippo stood for. For decades, Zippo had ruled because it was a machine that demanded attention and care. Owners fed it fuel, trimmed the blackened wick, replaced the tiny flint worn to a nub. Maintenance was the price of ownership, a tacit agreement that men were responsible for their own fire. The post-war generation, raised on abundance, had little interest in fixing things. They wanted convenience, instant gratification. Marcel Bitch, the French industrialist who had replaced the fountain pen with the disposable ballpoint, now turned his sights to lighters. The arrival of the Bitch lighter and its competitor, the Cricket, was an invasion. These sealed units could not be opened or repaired. They ran on pressurized butane, not liquid fuel. They had no wick, no mechanical heart. They were dirt cheap, available at any gas station for loose change. If lost or broken, they were discarded without thought. The impact was not only economic, it was spiritual. The heavy brass Zippo, a symbol of permanence and craftsmanship, was replaced by featherweight plastic. The sensory experience of fire changed. The Zippo clinked and hissed, the flame a ragged yellow tongue resisting the wind. The disposable lighters were silent, sterile, and fleeting. Fire was stripped of romance and danger, contained safely in child-proof plastic. Zippo looked upon this tide with horror. The company, built on the principle of, "It works or we fix it free," faced a new reality. The competitor's promise was implicit. It works until it doesn't, then replace it. Management doubled down on heritage, marketing Zippo as a rugged tool for the outdoors, a symbol of manliness. Yet market share bled away. Smokers, once the backbone of the lighter economy, switched en masse. Carrying fuel and flints became a burden. The plastic alternatives required nothing. Desperate attempts to adapt followed. In the 1980s, the Zippo Contempo, a butane model made in Japan, tried to bridge the gap. It was expensive, complex, and a failure. The Zippo Blue, A later attempt to modernize stripped out the wick, cotton, and felt, replacing them with a pressurized butane tank. It retained the metal case and hinge, but it no longer made the iconic clink. The flame was a harsh blue jet, the tactile soul of the lighter gone. Traditionalists rejected it. Modern consumers found it clunky and overpriced. It satisfied no one, symbolizing the broader collapse of American manufacturing in the plastic age. Zippo engineers were masters of brass and steel, stamping metal and crafting hinges to last 50 years. Plastic was an alien art form, a game rigged by industrialists whose only rule was cheaper, faster, worse. The factory in Bradford kept running, but the atmosphere had changed. Zippo, once ubiquitous, had become niche. By the 1990s, it was a groomsman's gift, a biker's accessory. The plastic enemy had won the pocket war, convincing the world that permanence was a burden. Landfills filled with billions of dead plastic lighters, while Zippos, still produced, increasingly went to display cases instead of pockets. Collectors became the primary customers. Zippos were bought, left sealed, never filled or struck. The lighter became a museum piece, a nostalgic token of an era when things were built to last. The fire was gone, replaced by the cold currency of collectors. Zippo was no longer a tool against darkness. It was a pretty metal box. The final siege did not come on battlefields or boardrooms. It came in the air itself. For decades, the world of Zippo had been smoky and dense, filled with the blue haze of tobacco. The lighter lived in offices, diners, bars, and factories. Its clink punctuated conversations, signaling pauses, reflection, and negotiation. By the 1990s, that atmosphere vanished. The cultural war on tobacco swept across the country. Offices, airplanes, restaurants, and bars went smoke-free. The habitat of the Zippo was systematically destroyed. The lighter, once a symbol of sophistication and adulthood, became a marker of guilt. Carrying a Zippo in 2000 no longer drew admiration. It drew dirty looks. The brass casing, once a badge of permanence, became a relic. The Zippo had survived war, depression, and plastic, only to face erasure from a world that no longer needed fire. The Zippo manufacturing company found itself in a terrifying position. They had built the perfect mousetrap, but the world had decided to ban the mice. The utility of the object collapsed. Zippo was a fire maker. Yes, but its design, the chimney, the fuel reservoir, the one-handed operation, was optimized for a single act: lighting a cigarette in the wind. Without the cigarette, the lighter became an orphan. This cultural exile was most visible in the death of the concert moment. For a generation, the Zippo held a sacred function beyond tobacco. When the house lights dimmed, and the band struck the slow, aching chords of a power ballad, tens of thousands of mechanical clicks sounded in the darkness. Thousands of thumbs struck flint wheels. The arena glowed not with spotlights, but with a sea of living flames. It was communal. The heat of thousands of Zippos could raise the temperature in the venue. It was dangerous, primal, a signal from audience to artist, a shared assertion of life, holding a piece of the sun in their hands. Then came the cell phone. In the early 2000s, the sea of fire was replaced by a sea of cold blue pixels. Audiences no longer held flames, they held screens. Concerts transformed from acts of participation into acts of recording. The warmth was gone. The smell of fuel was gone. The danger was gone. The Zippo had been evicted from the cathedral of rock and roll, replaced by the same device that was killing wristwatches and cameras. Fire was extinguished from the public consciousness. To survive, the company in Bradford pivoted, a tragic admission of defeat. They stopped selling the Zippo as a tool and sold it as a trinket, targeting collectors instead. Zippo catalogs of the 1940s showcased brushed chrome, plain brass, simple monograms, a hardware catalog. Modern catalogs became kaleidoscopes of pop culture: wolves, dragons, unicorns, pen-up girls, logos of video games and energy drinks. Even Zippos studded with crystals. The product was no longer meant to burn. It was meant to be admired. The Zippo became a zombie tool. Functional but dead inside because it would never be used. The orange safety sticker became the seal of the tomb. Removing it lowered resale value. Filling a lighter with fluid ruined its status as a collectible. Millions were purchased, displayed on shelves, still in boxes, the flint never sparking, the wick never burning, cotton never tasting fuel. They became monuments to lost utility, like swords hanging on walls in houses, where no one knows how to fence. The lifetime guarantee George Blaisdell cherished became irrelevant. A tool never used could never break. The factory on Barber Street still stands. The stamping presses still thunder. The quality of the Zippo has not declined. Unlike other companies that shipped production overseas or switched to plastic, Zippo remained in Bradford, loyal to metal. A Zippo made today is mechanically identical to one made in 1950. It is a masterpiece of stamping and assembly. But in a world that does not need it, it is a lonely object. The Zippo now competes not against other lighters, but against the concept of permanence itself. In the age of lithium-ion batteries and disposable vapes, recharging has replaced refilling. Maintaining a mechanical object, getting hands dirty with soot and fuel, learning the quirks of a hinge, these acts are alien. Modern consumers want magic, not mechanics. They want light to appear at a touch and vanish at a swipe. The ghost of the Zippo empire is the ghost of tactile reality. George Blaisdell wanted to give the American hand something to hold, a sense of control. Striking a Zippo created fire. It manipulated the elements. It was a small, fierce act of creation. Flicking a bitch consumed a product. Tapping a phone interacted with a simulation. The legacy of the Zippo is a heavy rectangular silence, a drawer full of grandfather's things. Too sentimental to throw away, but too modern to use. It is the silence of a wind-proof chimney with no battle to fight, because life is spent indoors. The tragedy is not that the Zippo failed. The tragedy is that it succeeded as the perfect object for a world that no longer exists. The smell of fuel has been replaced by nothing. The warm, dancing yellow chaos of a flame has been replaced by cold, sterile LED light. In that exchange, more was lost than a lighter. The connection to the physical, dangerous, beautiful world the Zippo was built to endure has been lost. The lid is closed now. The cam is locked. The brass is cold, waiting for a spark that will never come.